When Queen Elizabeth failed to produce an heir, the crown passed from the House of Tudor to the House of Stuart via the marriage of Margaret Tudor to the King of Scotland. Yes, keeping track of royal bloodlines can be a pain. A reading for a 73-year-old man on his deathbed revealed a past life as the Scottish King James V, the son of Margaret Tudor. His reading acknowledged the fullness of the historical record for this monarch, both pro and con. On the positive side, James ruled with authority and yet had sympathy for his poor subjects. He is said to have liked traveling incognito in his kingdom, disguised as a farmer. On the negative side, James's support of the Pope and Catholicism, combined with severe repression of Protestantism, included the burning at the stake of Patrick Hamilton, a leading Protestant reformer. The reading for this elderly man does make a point of drawing a parallel in the soul record of both incarnations. As a soul incarnated as James V, the entity gained, lost, and gained as it did in the 20th century incarnation. James V made a contribution to the hearts and minds of those under his influence, as did his 20th century counterpart on a lesser stage. From a strictly historical perspective, King James's stance on religion did not sit well with his uncle, Henry VIII, the ruler of England. After the death of his mother, Margaret Tudor, Henry's sister, James sent his army to invade England, one of the many family feuds in British history. But the Scots were defeated at Solway Moss, and news of the loss devastated King James V. He died soon thereafter, probably of a fever, leaving his only surviving legitimate child, Mary, to succeed him to the throne when she was just 6 days old. As a grown woman, Mary became known as Mary, Queen of Scots, an identity widely recognized due to her dramatic feud with her cousin, Queen Elizabeth of England. Mary lost that feud and her head, but not before she produced a son and heir, James VI of Scotland, who also inherited the throne of England after the death of Queen Elizabeth. Yes, those royal bloodlines again. In terms of our reincarnational inquiry based on the Casey readings, we simply need to skip down another generation in the family tree to James's son, Charles I, and his French wife, Henrietta. Although Edgar Casey never gave a reading for anyone with a past life as King Charles I, he did provide several readings for individuals said to have been in close contact with the king, including his wife, Queen Henrietta. A reading for a 63-year-old retired seamstress noted that in her most recent past life she had been Queen Henrietta, the wife of the English king who was beheaded. Her reading called attention to the mental anguish that she suffered during that life and its effect in her 20th century incarnation, in which she was unable to correlate the mental anguish of her physical ailments with the higher forces. In total, she received 15 readings, 13 of which were health readings that focused on her suffering with hypertensive cardiovascular disease and bronchitis. In terms of other past lives, this woman had been the mother of a king in ancient Egypt, hence a pattern of royalty for this soul entity. A reading for a 20-year-old woman described a past life as an attendant to Queen Henrietta. In the name Mary Tudor, one can only wonder if this is a historical remnant of the connection between the House of Tudor and House of Stuart, but no details of that sort are provided. As a trusted royal attendant, Mary Tudor gave and absorbed much counsel. However, all of it may not have been positive, as she carried over into her modern incarnation a latent urge to get even with you yet. On the positive side of the karmic ledger, she also carried forward the desire and ability to make the best of difficult situations. A past life as Helen of Troy was also listed in the reincarnational series for this individual, so again a pattern of high social status is evident. A reading for a 44-year-old woman described a past life as a servant named Millier in the household of the deposed ruler King Charles, waiting upon Queen Henrietta, who was, in fact, the one in power. Millier gained in many portions of that experience, but lost when she sided with her Catholic rulers because of fear, rather than expressing the Protestant beliefs that she held to be right and proper. She carried over into her modern incarnation a tendency to question the reliability of anyone who combines pomp with power. A reading for a 17-year-old girl described a past life as Irma, maid to Queen Henrietta. As a soul, she gained much through that experience from the trials through which she passed. She carried over into her modern incarnation a dislike of anyone who lords over others without the real intent and purpose for the good of the individual. Sounds like she was not too impressed with her royal employers, especially the Queen, who had a reputation for being overbearing. A reading for a 14-year-old boy indicated a past life as Hapworth, jester to King Charles I. As was noted with regard to the jester for Henry VIII, Hapworth was more than an entertainer. He provided counsel to the king. Considering that Charles ended up losing his throne and his head, one can reasonably question the value of Hapworth's counsel. Yet the reading acknowledges the dual nature of his experience, in which he gained and lost. In a material sense, he gained in providing aid to the king, but lost by disagreeing and falling into disfavor, not only with the king, but with those who warred against the king. He made enemies on both sides. Yet from a spiritual perspective, he gained in the latter portion of that incarnation, when he became a healer by using divinations, alchemy, and what we might now call hypnosis. In his modern incarnation, through sincerity, the latent abilities developed as Hapworth may be manifest as a medical doctor or as a politician that would improve economic and social conditions for groups and masses. Keep in mind that the reading was given in 1933 during the Great Depression. Interestingly, there was also a reading that provided information about another court jester for Charles I, this one named Iaxel. The reading was given for a 41-year-old railroad agent, noting that the jester Iaxel was of the same house and lineage as Queen Henrietta. So presumably he would have represented more of a French perspective on both humor and matters of state. The reading focused on the period after the beheading of King Charles, in which Iaxel became troublesome to Cromwell and his Commonwealth. Iaxel used humor to make jest of the new government through comic papers that he published. This carried over into his 20th century life as the urge to joke and jest, tease, torment, and berate people in a manner that could provide a wonderful lesson if people take the jesting in the proper manner. But it would require care and discretion. The reading observed that if Iaxel had shown discretion in that past life, he could have been an editorial writer for the established papers rather than a publisher of political comic books. A reading for a 35-year-old clothier described a past life as Bernheil, a tailor to King Charles I, who helped create the burial robe for that monarch. In that past life, he gained and lost. Gained in service rendered to others. Lost in the feeling that royalty, or persons of high estate, should receive special favor, while at the same time failing to achieve that status for himself. He carried over into his modern life an expertise in clothing and bodily adornments. Incidentally, his reading also indicated a past life as Matthew, the tax collector disciple of Jesus. A reading for an 18-year-old student described a past life as Burgess, counselor to Charles I and one favored by Queen Henrietta, who was his aunt in his 20th century incarnation. Apparently, Burgess was not very helpful as a counselor, as attested to by history and the reading given for this young man. The strategy of Burgess was simply to ally himself with those in power against the underdog, a rather bland approach that merited the unusual assessment in the reading that the entity neither gained nor lost, neither developed or retarded, for he never got around to applying that which he was capable of. Ouch! A reading for a 38-year-old nurse described a past life as Hilda, servant in the household of Charles I. The entity gained and lost through the experience. Hilda held Protestant religious beliefs and expressed her disapproval of the Catholicism of her royal employers, which may have caused her some problems. Furthermore, her religious orientation was strongly influenced by members of the opposite sex. So she probably felt used by men in that experience, for she carried over into her 20th century incarnation a mistrust of men, a distrust of strong religious beliefs, and mistrust of one-sided views on any subject. A reading for a 29-year-old woman described a past life as Knavesey, who served in the household of Charles I. In that experience, she gained and lost when she had to take a stand mentally and chose wrongly against her own self-interest. The urge carried over into her modern life as a love of glory of earthly position, and yet within having that inner feeling and awareness that such status is to be gained by inner consciousness rather than by outward show. She also carried over a latent feeling that what is mine from that past life as Knavesey. A reading for a 35-year-old real estate agent described a past life as Duan, a soldier in the army of Charles I. Duan gained from that experience in developing the ability to express himself in defense of his own ideas, yet he lost in attempting to force the issue upon others. Apparently, he did learn from that experience because he carried forward into his modern incarnation the awareness that civil and religious liberty is the natural heritage of every individual. So we have caught a psychic glimpse of a royal couple, the wife wielding the real power in the relationship, promoting a losing agenda that divided the people along religious lines, at times even within the royal household itself. This produced a split between royalty, who insisted on absolute power and the divine right of kings, and the common people, just trying to have a decent life and some freedom over their existence. The result was a civil war, the beheading of the king, and the establishment of a commonwealth under a charismatic leader of the masses known as Oliver Cromwell.